We
are
cultivate.
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 We are cultivate.
Hello and welcome to Ye Olde Crime, where we discuss the funny, strange, and obscure crimes of yesteryear. I'm your host, Lindsay Valenti, and with me is my sister and co-host, Maddie Stengel.
Hello.
Well, hello there.
Hi.
Yeah. So, if you've listened to the show in the past, you know that I usually cover something horrible on Thanksgiving that has to do with the indigenous peoples of North America and the horrible things that we did to them.
We being the majority white Europeans or, just others that thought they could conquer a land that was already established.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying.
We as in me, as in I am white.
Yeah. It's me. But before we get to the really sad and horrible things, if you're interested in getting some of your holiday shopping done.
Speaking of capitalism,
you can get 40% off everything at our TeePublic shop November 25th through the 30th. So if you would like to get your Ye Olde Crime swag on, please feel free. Or if you want to check out any other creators who were over on TeePublic, you get 40% off everything on their site.
That's really cool.
So now that that's done, we're going to be discussing the Sand Creek Massacre.
Oh, great.
Information was pulled from the following sources: a 2024 National Park Service History Archives e-library link, 2023 Britannica article, 2021 Digital History article, 2020 History article, 2014 Smithsonian Magazine article by Tony Horvitz, American Battlefield Trust, City of Boulder, Colorado, the Conservation Fund, National Park Foundation, 2 National Park Service links, Northwestern University, PBS Colorado Experience, Season 2, Episode 210, Sand Creek Massacre Foundation, Wikipedia, and Zen Education Project. And links to all of these articles will be included in the show notes.
All right.
We wouldn't be here without support from listeners like you. If you're interested in supporting us financially, you can leave a one-time or monthly donation over on Buy Me a Coffee or our Venmo page. Links are in the show notes. And we make a point of reaching out to send you a thank you note and stickers to show our appreciation.
Want to show your support in a more concrete way? Pick up some Ye Olde Crime merch over at our TeePublic shop. We shout out whenever there is a sale each month, and we work to make sure we're creating new designs and changing it up whenever possible. And hey, thanks for listening.
This coming Friday marks the 160th anniversary of a truly horrific and often overlooked part of Colorado's history. But before we discuss the dark events of November 29th, 1864, we need to first talk about the area and the indigenous peoples who lived there.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm not super familiar with who lived there in Colorado. It's not really our area.
No. So the Central Plains, an area of the United States that stretches from the Missouri River in the Midwest to the Rocky Mountains in the West, was home to several indigenous tribes, such as the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Lakota, Comanche, and others. If you'll remember last week, we'd mentioned the Lakota.
Yeah.
The Plains Indians utilized horses to aid in their buffalo hunts, an animal that was pretty central to their way of life. They would use every part of the buffalo.
Yeah, they really did. They were very wonderful, and they were zero waste before zero waste was a thing.
Yep, the OG zero wasters. In the winter, certain areas along creeks and rivers would be designated stopping grounds and safe havens, offering shelter, firewood, and drinking water. One of these locations was Big Sandy Creek, which was a popular stop along the Smoky Hill Lodgepole Trail.
Okay, so this was more of an established community spot then?
Yes.
Would it be okay to think of it more as like what like a national park would kind of be like now? Where like kind of a free zone-ish for people to just stop and be for a bit?
Yes.
Like not really a town, not really like anything super established.
Yes. So it was more just kind of like a rest stop, if you want to consider it like that.
Okay.
European Americans and settlers started crossing the Central Plains in large numbers in 1821, utilizing the Santa Fe Trail along the Arkansas River, then later the Oregon Trail, which followed the Platte River.
We all know that one.
As we well know, not all of the indigenous peoples viewed these outsiders with open arms, and for good reason, as they found themselves quickly outnumbered 3-1 by white settlers.
That would be really scary.
Mm-hmm.
It would be really intimidating, especially since the goals of all the white settlers was to establish land, to establish a bunch of stuff that, like, I'm sure not everybody agreed to.
Yep. As tensions began to lead to violence, the U.S. government looked for ways to broker peace treaties with the tribes of the area, such as the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty that affected the territory of the Central Plains Indians and the area north of the Arkansas River to the Nebraska border.
Oh, okay. That's a big space.
Mm-hmm. So this treaty promised the Cheyenne and the Arapaho protection and provisions as long as they provided and allowed safe passage for white people traveling through their lands.
Okay, that's unfair, though, because there's always going to be extremists.
No, I know.
For both sides, too.
Yeah. So it should come as no surprise that this peace treaty ran into issues almost from the get-go.
Yeah.
In the late 1850s, gold was discovered in the Rocky Mountains by prospectors. And once the government got it into their heads that perhaps more of the Central Plains territory held rich mineral deposits, they backpedaled on the promises that had been made in the 1851 treaty almost immediately.
How did they do that? Did they just, like, disregard it? Like, how do you just ignore a treaty?
By writing a new treaty, which was signed on February 8th, 1861, so 10 years later, known as the Fort Wise Treaty, that required the Arapaho and the Cheyenne to give up all their previously agreed upon territory, with the exception of a small 600 square mile reservation, which they would be expected to occupy.
Both tribes?
Yes.
Together?
Yep.
Whether or not they were actually a peaceful group?
Well, they liked each other, thankfully, but...
Well, that's good, but still, like, not assumed.
Yeah. Cheyenne chiefs Black Kettle, White Antelope, Lean Bear, Little Wolf, and Tall Bear, and Arapaho chiefs Little Raven, Storm, Shavehead, Big Mouth, and Left Hand signed this treaty, although many others from both nations refused and did not agree with it. And it was due to this treaty that the Colorado Territory was established in 1861. So by agreeing to give up a huge portion of their land,
it became Colorado. Bummer.
And just a few months later, the Civil War broke out, which caused the Army to withdraw the bulk of their troops in the frontier back east to serve in the conflict, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, it's good for them as, like, let the white people fight it out, and maybe we can pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah. The following year, in 1862, Congress passed the Homestead and Pacific Railway Acts, which opened the door to an influx of Western expansions for settlers.
I didn't realize they did that all during the Civil War. What a horrific time.
Yeah.
To be in the United States.
Yeah. Following the war, Colonel John Shivington, who was a war hero and Methodist minister, was charged with commanding the troops of the Colorado Military District. Colonel Shivington was larger than life, standing at 6 foot 4 inches tall and weighing over 200 pounds.
Which would have been huge then. Like,
Yep.
it's still, that's a big dude now, but like,
back then it would have been big.
uncommon.
He had a booming voice and fought for the Union during the conflict. He even led Union troops during a battle at Glorieta Pass in New Mexico, defeating the Confederates who were looking to invade the Colorado gold mines, which I didn't know that that was a thing.
That makes sense, though. Tried to steal, like, they had no money.
For context on his character, this man, who had political aspirations, was known for saying, quote, "It is right or honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill Indians," end quote.
Oh, he was that kind of Christian.
Yes.
Not a Christian.
Even though he was an abolitionist and he believed in abolishing slavery, Native Americans
They
were
weren't
different.
people. They weren't people, according to him.
Yeah.
Were they?
No. And as colonel, he called for 100-day enlistments for volunteers eager to fight, said Indians.
So he'd keep them. He'd be like, you can't just leave after you realize how horrific it is. You have to stay for 100 days.
Yep.
Oh.
In the spring of 1864, Colonel Shivington ordered attacks on 4 separate Cheyenne villages. When some of his troops killed Peace Chief Lean Bear in Kansas, warriors of the Plains Indians understandably retaliated.
Yeah.
In June of that year, Governor John Evans of the Colorado Territory attempted to isolate the more hostile tribes by inviting quote-unquote friendly Indians to camp close to military outposts, promising increased provisions and protection.
Mm-hmm.
He issued a proclamation on June 27, 1864, that read in part, quote, "I direct that all friendly Indians keep away from those who are at war and go to places of safety. Friendly Arapahoes and Cheyennes belonging on the Arkansas River will go to Major Cawley, U.S. Indian Agent at Fort Leon, who will give them provisions and show them a place of safety," end quote.
Mm.
So as part of this treaty, if you were a quote-unquote friendly Indian and you lived close to a military outpost, so like Fort Lyon, the soldiers working there and living there would give you food provisions.
Mm-hmm.
But only as long as they were ordered to do so.
Right, and I'm sure it was really fair, and the food was really good and accessible and delicious and really easy to get to, and they were just handing them out.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Tensions came to a head in the summer of 1864 when a white rancher family named the Hungates living outside Denver were murdered, and the suspects were believed to be a raiding party of the Cheyenne or Arapaho.
Okay.
This event was particularly gross given that they put the family's bodies on display.
So it was a killing to kind of instigate.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little more of an extra FU.
Yep.
Kind of a thing.
Meanwhile, annoyed that his first proclamation was being ignored, Governor Evans issued a second proclamation on August 11th, 1864, that read in part, quote, "Authorizing all citizens of Colorado to go in pursuit of all hostile Indians on the plains, to kill and destroy as enemies of the country, wherever they may be found, all such hostile Indians," end quote.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So he just essentially made like a purge proclamation.
Mm-hmm.
A racist purge proclamation.
Yep. So many continued to hope for peace, with a number of leaders taking part in a conference at Camp Weld near Denver, Colorado. I think it was the end of August, beginning of September in 1864, which was attended by Governor Evans and Colonel Shivington. One of the peace chiefs, Chief Blackkettle, who I mentioned before, was quoted on September 28th as saying, quote, All we ask is that we have peace with the whites, end quote.
Yeah, I bet he was tired. Because, I mean, at this point, how long have we just been disturbing their peace in general? Just by existing. Like,
Yeah.
violence aside,
Mhm.
whatever. Just us existing in their space. Like, how long had it been at that point where they're just tired? Like,
it was like 13 years at this point that
that's a
people
long
have
time.
for sure been in their area. Yeah.
But at the same time, that's still so new.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that means generations of people who never had to deal with it before will likely still be really upset that they're having to deal with it now.
Colonel Shivington raised a new regiment. One man that would later participate in the tragedy noted that, quote, "At the time the 3rd Colorado Regiment was raised, the idea was very general that a war of extermination should be waged, that neither sex nor age should be spared, and women held to these views in common with men," end quote. So white women also felt this way, is essentially what he's saying.
Yeah.
On October 10th, 22 men from D Company attacked a Cheyenne camp, murdering 4 women, 3 men, 2 babies, and 1 young boy.
Why would we have, like, I've never understood that, like, the eye for an eye thing, like, killing women and children.
I don't know. So after that meeting at Camp Weld, those wishing for peace were instructed by Governor Evans to travel to their nearest Indian agent at Fort Lyon, which was 200 miles to the south.
That's a long trip in general.
Yeah.
Let alone back then. Holy smokes.
And ahead of the journey, Chief Black Kettle contacted Major Edward Wynkoop at Fort Lyon, hoping that this move would allow them to take steps to negotiate peace. So he was like, "We are coming. We are planning to set up camp outside of Fort Lyon, just so you know we're coming."
Mm-hmm.
Now, several Plains Indians took part in this journey and then set up camp at Sand Creek, which at that point was a chief's village that had already been established, and it was about 70 miles shy of Fort Lyon.
Okay, so now it's a little more populated.
Yes. So rather than being just like a rest stop, it was now an established village. And it was here that around 750 members of the Cheyenne and Arapaho, which included 33 chiefs and leaders, but primarily women, children, and the elderly, had kind of moved into.
Okay.
And among the number of chiefs, it included Black Kettle, White Antelope, One Eye, Yellow Wolf, Big Man, Bear Man, War Bonnet, Spotted Crow, Bear Robe, Stands in the Water, Graybeard, and Little Bear. So that was just a handful of the chiefs.
Yeah, that's a lot of them, though.
Mm-hmm. And the village held about 140 to 150 lodges, and of the 750 that lived there, only around 100 of them were fighting age men.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, you're not going to have able-bodied people everywhere you turn.
Yeah.
All the time.
And all seemed peaceful in the isolated camp in October and November until it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
In the pre-dawn of November 29th, 1864, women were awoken by what they believed to be a herd of buffalo approaching the camp. And the reality is much more horrifying.
Yeah.
It was 675 troops, 250 from the 1st Colorado U.S. Volunteer Cavalry, and 425 from the 3rd Colorado Volunteer Cavalry, all under the direction of Colonel Shivington.
That's terrifying.
These soldiers were armed not only with guns, but 4 howitzers. And for those who don't know, howitzers are an artillery gun similar to a cannon that is designed to fire shells at a high angle to reach targets that are hiding behind covers or in trenches.
Mm-hmm. And that would have been a really advanced weapon at the time, too.
Yes. Meanwhile, the teepee of Peace Chief Black Kettle flew not only a 34-star flag, but a white flag of truce and peace. A year before, when he had visited Washington, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs had presented him with the American flag, assuring him that as long as he flew the Stars and Stripes, no soldiers would ever fire on him and his people.
And he had it up and proud and
Yep.
ready at the time.
Yep. White Antelope and other chiefs reached for their weapons and walked toward the mounted soldiers, unsure of what was happening.
Right.
And it was at that moment that the cavalry opened fire.
They didn't even tell him.
No.
They just started mowing him down.
Quote, Cheyenne Chief Black Kettle made sure the soldiers saw the white flag of surrender and the U.S. flag flying above our camp. Another important Cheyenne chief, White Antelope, pleaded with the soldiers to stop attacking the peaceful camp by singing a journey song. But he was shot. He died underneath the flags Colorado's Governor Evans said would show that we were peaceful. End quote.
And who was quoted saying that? Who survived enough to say something?
That was just one of the survivors. We'll get into the rest of it.
Okay.
At the sound of gunfire, the women, children, and elderly attempted to flee north into the dry creek bed. Chief Black Kettle, Little Bear, George Bent, and about 100 other natives ran 1 to 2 miles upstream and hastily dug protective pits. It was here that the largest number of non-combatants were murdered when howitzer cannons shot 12-pound canisters into the sand pits.
Yeah. If you're even thinking of like crowds and stuff too, that would definitely crush a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. When Colonel Shivington arrived shortly after the initial attack, he ordered the 1st Regiment to fire upon the villagers as they fled. Quote, kill them big and small. Nits become lice, end quote.
He did not.
No, he did.
Oh my God.
Things come to a head and utter chaos ensues as his soldiers start to mow down the Cheyenne and Arapaho trapped at Sand Creek after being ordered to take no prisoners. Young men valiantly attempted to fight off their attackers with a handful of rifles and bows and arrows, but they were overwhelmed. Women and children were shot point blank, and for 7 hours, soldiers chased people and the herds of ponies that had been at the camp for 8 to 10 miles.
You couldn't even play dead at that point. 8 hours?
Mm-mm.
Oh my God.
Captain Silas Soule and Lieutenant Joseph Kramer chose to defy Colonel Shivington's orders, commanding their companies, D and K of the 1st Regiment, to stand down and not engage in the attack. They and their men bore witness to the slaughter of the Arapaho and Cheyenne, both those who attempted to flee by climbing the sandbanks and those who surrendered. So even if they surrendered, they shot them.
Yeah, I mean, that was the order.
Yep.
That's what they were told.
Some 6 to 8 hours later, across an area of 12,500 acres, over 230 Cheyenne and Arapaho, which included 13 Cheyenne chiefs and 1 Arapaho chief, had been murdered compared to the 18 dead and 70 wounded of the U.S. Army. Around 150 of the indigenous people that had been killed were women, children, and the elderly, and the total of those that died made up a quarter of the camp's population. Among the dead included White Antelope, Stands in the Water, Lone Bear, and his wife. Later newspaper reports of the day would falsely claim that the number of indigenous people that perished that day was 500.
Why? Just why?
I don't know. Sensationalize it more, I guess.
Make it be like a more inflated victory.
Mm-hmm.
Like make it clear that we were not the non-aggressors and that it was the right thing to do.
Yep. The soldiers that took part in the slaughter not only looted the village, but took 600 horses and 3 prisoners, all children. They then proceeded to ransack and burn the village. Soldiers also mutilated the dead the following day, taking jewelry, body parts, and scalps as macabre trophies.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
The Cheyenne and Arapaho who miraculously survived the unprovoked attack fled wounded and bleeding north to the Smoky Hill River, heading towards the camp of a larger band of Cheyenne. One survivor of the massacre, a man named George Bent, remembers, quote, "We ran up the creek with the cavalry following us. It was not a terrible sight. men, women, and children lying thickly scattered on the sand, end quote.
I can't imagine. It's not like they're going to clean it up.
And at first, Colonel Shivington was viewed as a hero for his victory against the savages.
Oh, I'm sure.
Until it became clear that he had, in fact, ordered the killing of peaceful natives in a surprise ambush. Now, the American public was divided on the issue. Locals in Denver cheered for the soldiers who returned with their grotesque human trophies, giving them a parade that was 2 miles long.
Yeah. I mean, I believe that because, like, for them, they were being harassed their whole lives.
Mm-hmm.
But I still don't like it. I still don't like it.
Yeah. And others, understandably, were appalled by the brutality.
Yeah.
Following the attack, Captain Soule wrote to Major Wynkoop, quote, "It was hard to see little children on their knees have their brains beat out by men professing to be civilized," end quote.
Yep.
And thanks to whistleblowers like Captain Soule, word of what really happened at Sand Creek started to unfold in the media and across the nation.
Could you imagine how scary that would be, being the whistleblower for that? Especially after they showed exactly what they do,
Mm-hmm.
like mutilating children.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be really scary. Like, good for him.
Once news reached the Army in early 1865, they ordered an immediate investigation, and Congress would order 2 more. Sand Creek became the most investigated event of the Civil War. Commanders Captain Silas Soule and Lieutenant Joseph Kramer, who had ordered their men to stand down, provided written and verbal testimony that shocked both military leaders and the national public during the April 1865 Army investigation. Quote, "For more than 2 hours, the work of murder and barbarity was continued until more than 100 dead bodies, 3/4 of them women and children, lay on the plain as evidence of the fiendish malignity and cruelty of the officers who had so sedulously and carefully plotted the massacre, and of the soldiers who had so faithfully acted out the spirit of their officers," end quote.
Mm-hmm.
Lieutenant Cranmer shared that he had seen, quote, "a squaw ripped open and a child taken from her, little children shot while begging for their lives," end quote.
That's horrific.
Captain Soule noted the desecration of the victims, stating they not only scalped many of the people they killed, but also cut off the, quote, "ears and privates," end quotes, of the chiefs, adding that, quote, "squaws' snatches were cut out for trophies," end quote.
It's just so horrific. Like, just the total dehumanization of them.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Colonel Shivington provided a different account.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure he did.
Which was swiftly rejected by the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the Civil War. It was noted in that December 1865 hearing that, quote, "it is difficult to believe that beings disgracing the uniform of United States soldiers and officers could commit such acts of cruelty and barbarity," end quote.
I think if history's shown us anything, it doesn't matter what you wear. Evil can exist just about anywhere.
Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell, the sole Native American in Congress at the time, representing Colorado, called the event, quote, "one of the most disgraceful moments in American history," end quote.
Agreed.
An Army judge condemned Colonel Shivington's, quote, "cowardly, cold-blooded slaughter," end quote, of the Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians. The Joint Congressional Committee came to the unanimous conclusion that Colonel Shivington had, quote, "deliberately planned and executed a foul and dastardly massacre, which would have disgraced the veriest savage among those who were victims of this cruelty," end quote.
Mm-hmm.
Even so, Colonel Shivington was never tried or charged for the murders. He had resigned from service in December of 1864 before he could be court-martialed and punished by military law, and he also abandoned any hopes of a political career, which he should have.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Was your future ruined? Oh, at least you're still alive, bitch. Like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Territorial Governor John Evans faced considerable backlash from the public and was forced to resign in 1865 under orders from President Lincoln.
Oh, Lincoln.
I know. Captain Soule would go on to be assassinated in Denver after testifying at the inquiry.
I'm not surprised, actually.
Yeah. I can't remember. I want to say it was like 5 or 6 months after he had given testimony at the inquiry. He had just been stationed in Denver. I want to say as like a deputy or something. He'd just gotten married. He went to a play, heard some shots outside, went out to investigate, and was assassinated.
Yeah, so apparently politicians can never attend shows ever.
Apparently.
If history has shown us anything,
Yeah.
stay home.
That same year, in 1865, the Little Arkansas Treaty was put into place and accepted by Chief Blackkettle's and his followers, in which the U.S. government took responsibility for the slaying, promising reparations to the families of those that survived for the, quote, gross and wanton outrages, end quote, that were brought upon them. Unsurprisingly, these reparations have never been fulfilled.
I was just going to say, I've never heard of these reparations.
And although Chief Blackkettle was able to resettle his band on designated land in Oklahoma, he would be killed just 3 years later in 1868 during another massacre that ended in the deaths of 30 to 60 Cheyenne under the charge of General George Armstrong Custer.
We know that one.
Yeah. The Sand Creek incident was one of the many occurrences that caused the Arapaho-Cheyenne War that would follow. Many of the Arapaho and Cheyenne who survived retaliated against white settlers in 1865 who lived in Colorado and Wyoming. The Plains Indian Wars continued for 12 years after the massacre at Sand Creek, with General Sherman and Sheridan being sent west with Union soldiers to deal with the rising conflict. This war would last 5 times as long as the Civil War, with some of the fights taking place at Beecher Island, Washita, Summit Springs, Paulo Duro Canyon, Sapa Creek, and the Little Bighorn, culminating in Wounded Knee in 1890, which essentially decimated the Plains Indians' resistance altogether.
Yeah.
Members of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations lead a very spiritual life, believing that all things are connected: the land, plants, animals, wind, water, and people. For them, although the site of the Sand Creek Massacre is marked by tragedy, it is also viewed as a sacred and hallowed place, as it is where the blood and spirits of those who perished that day merged with the earth.
That makes sense. That it would become... I mean, how many places in Europe and stuff have Christians and Muslims deemed sacred and holy after massacres happened?
Understandably, the event devastated generations of the Arapaho and Cheyenne peoples, not only due to the deaths of so many of their families and the loss of so much traditional knowledge, but several Cheyenne chiefs were murdered, which caused a disruption in the governance of the tribe.
Yeah. And I mean, like, generations and generations. That'd be like losing half of our governors and expecting to just do, like, normal operations.
And this may not mean much to us, but surviving members lost faith in their leaders.
Yeah.
Like Chief Blackkettle, who lost his credibility after the massacre.
Right. Like, how are you going to try to protect us from people who won't even... Like, the Americans were the savages, not keeping their promises, not maintaining their treaties, going back on their word. They were the real monsters.
Savages,
yeah, they were the savages that couldn't be tamed. And of course you'd lose faith because they have better weapons, they have more people, they have more money.
Yeah, a lot of people were upset with Chief Blackkettle for not fighting back, but it's like, how could he have? And he was a peace chief. He always wanted peace. He did not want to fight with the white people. That was That was the whole point. But following the tragedy, the government policy towards the indigenous peoples was shifted from forcing them into reservations to forcing them to assimilate.
Mm.
Enter boarding schools, where tribal children were forced to give up their culture, language, and traditional ways of life in order to better fit in with their white Christian neighbors.
Mm-hmm. And we all know what these led to as well.
Yep.
In terms of further erasure and tragedy with their people.
The massacre seemed to fade from the collective memory of the Anglo-Americans, downgrading it to a battle, as it's been noted on the 1909 Civil War monument located near the Colorado State House. Not to mention, several sites in Colorado were named for Shivington, Governor Evans, and other key players in the event. In fact, the scalp of a Native American that had been killed at Sand Creek remained on display at a historical museum in Colorado until the 1960s.
You're kidding.
Nope.
Whoa.
Thankfully, many of the tribes still maintain their identities and ways of life, even after all the wrongs that European Americans did to them. Members of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations continue to live in Oklahoma, Wyoming, and Montana. In 2000, manuscript copies of letters that had been written by Captain Soule and Lieutenant Kramer were found in Denver, providing first-hand accounts of the massacre, as well as the reticence that some 100 soldiers had to take their part in it.
Could you imagine stumbling upon that for the first time?
God.
Especially in like 2000?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, who had that? Who squirreled that away and kept that a secret that long?
Yeah, like, where was that?
Yeah.
In 2007, the Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site was established as part of the National Park Service, and is the only one in the National Park System to have massacre included in its title. Its creation was mandated by Congress in 1998, but it took almost 10 years to open, partially as a result of 9/11.
Well, yeah, because it would be really sensitive then.
Mm-hmm. And it's here that the story of the Sand Creek Massacre is preserved, providing awareness to the atrocities that took place there in an effort to prevent similar tragedies from taking place again in the future. The historic site contains an Indian graveyard and a monument atop a low bluff. The area, which was treeless and mostly dry by late November, offers no trace of the Indian village that previously occupied the land or signs of the massacre other than some bullets, artillery fragments, and a few other relics that have been unearthed by archaeologists. Mm-hmm. In 2008, a year after the site opened, a ceremony was held there as descendants of those who were slaughtered took the repatriated skulls and scalps of their ancestors and buried them at the Sand Creek Cemetery. As they were lowered into the ground, a drum group chanted the death song of Chief White Antelope that he sang as the troops descended on the village. Quote, "Nothing lives long, only the earth and the mountains," end quote.
I can't imagine how powerful that would have been.
In 2021, Colorado's political leaders made formal apologies for the atrocities committed against the Native Americans of the Colorado Territory, and rescinded the 1864 proclamations of Governor Evans that authorized the killing of Native peoples. So they were still on the books.
I'm not surprised, but I'm also really upset.
Yeah. In 2022, an additional 3,500 acres of land were acquired by the Conservation Fund and transferred to the National Park Service, so visitors to the historic massacre site can experience the entirety of the area where the tragedy took place. Because prior to that, it was only, I think, 8,000 acres. Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, which was founded by Governor Evans, as well as the University of Denver, launched investigations into their founder, and in light of that investigation, have chosen to advance their institution's inclusivity of Native Americans and work to promote healing following the Sand Creek Massacre. And
how are they doing that?
They have a lot of programming and projects that they do.
Okay, nice.
Descendants of those slain, as well as representatives, ceremonial leaders, and youth, work to ensure that remains and artifacts from that day are given back to the Cheyenne and Arapaho peoples. Each year in November, they also hold a Sand Creek Massacre spiritual healing run/walk from the site of the massacre 173 miles to the steps of the Colorado State Capitol, where they read aloud the letters of Silas Soule. Started by Lee Lone Bear, a Northern Cheyenne descendant of survivors of the massacre, the run/walk provides healing for all and represents the route that the soldiers used as they returned to Denver following the slaying. So, like the route that they took as they were carrying the trophies of those that perished. This year, the event took place on October 17th through the 20th, but if you live in the Denver area and are interested in attending the event next year, I encourage you to look into and research when it will take place.
Yeah.
Lastly, I will encourage anybody who is listening to this to watch the hour-long episode that PBS put together about this.
Yeah.
It's very powerful, very well done, and has some pretty gut-wrenching testimonials from descendants of those who were slaughtered.
I can imagine.
And on that note, that is the Sand Creek Massacre.
I'm really glad you shared the story, but it's really unfortunate that it's a story to share.
Yeah. That's how I feel about it. Like there was a part in the documentary or in the episode, the PBS episode, where I almost lost it as they were sharing some of the more gruesome details of what happened that day. And I for a split second was like, why the hell am I writing this? Why the hell am I sharing this? And it's because it's important to know.
It is. Well, again, you didn't do it. I didn't do it, but it happened. Mm-hmm. And it's important to acknowledge that it happened. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it could very easily happen again.
Yep.
Anywhere, anytime,
yep.
At any point, with any group of people.
Yep.
We are creatures capable of violence, and we're creatures capable of peace, and we have to acknowledge both to exist.
We'd love to hear from you, and there's a couple of ways you can reach out to us. You can email us at yeoldecrimepodcast@gmail.com, where you can send us story ideas, share any spooky stories you may have, fun gifts, or even just to say hello.
You can also reach out to us via snail mail. Remember mail? Our mailing address is Ye Olde Crime Podcast, P.O. Box 341, Wyoming, Minnesota 55092. Fun fact, we like to send out thank you cards with fun stickers you can't get at our shop, so it's worth the cost of a stamp.
This week's podcast plug is the Over the Fence podcast. Please join Molly and Cody as they talk true crime in the most normal place in the world, over the fence, or to be specific, over their backyard fence, to share their mutual fascination with all things true crime, ghostly, and just creepy in general. They are part of the Darkcast Network, and we'll have a link to their show in the show notes.
Nice.
And Kiri-Ann would like to know, is there any historic person you would like to bring to the present to give them a second chance in life?
Oh, man.
I know.
There's a lot of people. There's a lot of people I would like to see, but there was also, there are people too where their deaths actually may or may not have outshined what they could have been capable of.
That's true, yeah.
As people too. Like, could they have actually gotten things done had there not been the outrage in their death?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, honestly, like, being topical, it would be interesting to see how Abe Lincoln would have progressed through his presidency.
That was who my mind first went to.
Yeah, probably just because we mentioned him.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, there were a lot of people that really, really hated him.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been interesting to see, would he have still been the hero he is today, or would he have been cast into obscurity like so many presidents that have come and gone?
Mm-hmm. My first choice would be to bring Teddy Roosevelt back to see what his thoughts would be on his political party today.
Oh my gosh, that would be so amazing. Could you imagine? He comes back and he just takes everybody by the ear and just really
just grabs the biggest stick and just starts beating people with it.
just fixes everything. I agree. Let's bring Teddy back. Could you imagine? Oh man, that would be so cool. And who's not going to listen to him at that point?
I mean, not everything he did, but for the bulk of his stuff, yeah.
Well,
seeing
and
him come in and just like,
I feel like too, if you go back in history, he's pretty bipartisan for the most part. Like people who think about him, both of our main parties loved him in some way or another.
if you love the show, the best way to support us is to leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Good Pods, Castbox, Podcast Addict, and or Audible. Links to all of these are in our show notes, or if you're already listening on one of these platforms, you know what to do.
Oh, and while you're at it, shoot us a question you'd like to hear us answer on the pod. We'll give you a special shout out and address your burning questions all at the same time. The weirder, the better. Submit them via link in our show notes or shoot them to us in our DMs.
All right. On that note, what is something good you'd like to share?
Well, we had a big report come out at work, and it was a culmination of a lot of hard work from people that like I didn't contribute much at all. I came in very last minute, but they were celebrating this week, and we were talking about celebrations and food and stuff, and in like the coping of the stress of the report, we started talking about cooking and baking, and so I got like re-inspired from my coworkers to do some things this week in terms of trying some new food. And my partner's birthday is coming up, and he requested French coffee macarons, so I'm gonna make some coffee flavored ones.
Nice.
How about you? What's something good you'd like to share?
So I had a very productive weekend. I did so many things, all in preparation for when I have my second foot surgery next week. I will have to sort of live in my office for the next 2-3 weeks just because my futon is lower to the ground, so it's easier for me to get in and out of when I only have the use of one foot, and it's conveniently located close to a bathroom.
And the staircase next to it isn't super steep too.
Correct. So I cleaned my office this weekend, and I took care of a handful of projects that I had been putting off.
Nice. It looks good. I can confirm. Her office looks
Very
great.
nice. Cleaned Charlie's enclosure. He's got new stuff in there.
Nice.
I got him a really nice stick that he can climb on.
Snakes do love sticks.
Snakes love sticks. And got all of my youngest Girl Scout badges on her vest.
Nice.
So, like, look at me.
Heck yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I just had a really productive weekend, and it was really nice.
That's awesome.
All right. Shall we? Want to be social with us? You can see pics from this week's episode, bonus content, and funny memes on X at Ye Olde Crime Pod, or on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube at Ye Olde Crime Podcast.
Speaking of YouTube, we have a special playlist just for our Can You Crack the Cramp Word segments with our guest podcasters to see who can correctly guess the meaning of some obscure Victorian slang terms. If that's your thing, check it out.
And on that note, as always, I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Madison.
And we'll see you next time with another tale
As old as crime.